everyone. My name is Christina Dorset, and I'm one of the research and instruction librarians at Wolfgram Memorial Library on Widener University's Chester campus. The following panel discussion will begin in progress. I apologize for not hitting the record button sooner, but the bulk of the content is still there, and I hope that you enjoy. Thank you.
To any case involving an attempt to ban books. And as Dana said, we are currently in a season where we're experiencing reviewing and removal of books from school curricula, from school libraries, and even from public libraries. And I want to discuss the limited constitutional remedies or approaches to this, but I want to set the stage by saying that the First Amendment's promise of freedom of speech and freedom of expression will really be of limited utility in this fight. And most of this will need to be waged in the political arena, and that can be good or bad. But I do want to kind of frame out this discussion in terms of the First Amendment. So it's useful to think of different contexts in which these issues arise. So let's start with the curriculum. And a great example of this would be the so-called Don't Say Gay law in Florida. And there are related initiatives that keep certain topics, and by extension, books that cover these topics from students. And in these cases, I think it's going to be difficult for lawsuits to win based on the First Amendment. But one possible argument would be that the standards are vague and hard to apply. So for example, the Florida law says, no instruction on, quote, sexual orientation or gender identity in kindergarten through grade 3, or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. So as to the lower grades, grades K through 3, it's pretty clear what's being said, but in the upper classes, age appropriate or developmentally appropriate, those terms are not clear and not well defined. And so the concern is that teachers might feel that they can't say anything because if they trench onto areas that are forbidden or that some parent finds forbidden, they can find themselves out of a job or disciplined in some way. So that is a concern in terms of vagueness. That it might chill speech. But aside from that, the Supreme Court has suggested that this sort of curricular choice is not something courts want to be in the business of second guessing, up to a point, of course. So if they were saying you can talk about straight sexual orientation, but not about gender identity or gay and lesbian sexual orientation, that would be a problem. Now let's move to school libraries, which is a little bit different as far as the Supreme Court is concerned. So, and here I'm talking about school libraries in the K through 12 realm, not university libraries. So here we have a Supreme Court case from 1982 that says a school can't remove books from a school library if the motivation is political. But they can do so for other reasons, right? So if they feel, they have a lot of discretion. So if they feel it's pervasively vulgar, whatever that means, they can take the book out. But what does that mean, right? And you can imagine a savvy board of education masking its true concerns, right? And saying, well, this is not because it treats LGBT issues, but because it has obscenity or vulgarity or something like that in the book. There is that case, rather, from 1982 involved books that we would consider important sort of canonical works, one by Kurt Vonnegut, by Langston Hughes, by former Black Panther member Eldridge Cleaver, called Soul on Ice. And the court said if the motivation really was political to shield students from certain ideas, that's not okay under the Constitution, right? Now we can move to the public library context. And there, books have been slotted for removal and review, or review and removal as well. And here we don't have a controlling Supreme Court case, but I think the argument for removal is even weaker. So government in these cases is trying to restrict what the court has called the right to receive information. And that was also in this 1982 case. Now, of course, when you're talking about children, the government has more discretion in making decisions for them, right? But you can put books behind the counter, right? And say, this book is not appropriate to be checked out by children, but it should still be accessible to adults. But the acquisitions process, right, in terms of how a public library suggests books for purchase, that's trickier, right? They don't have an unlimited budget, so you'd have to show there that they're consistently not, choosing books, let's say written by LGBT, Q authors, or about those subjects, or written by people of color. If you could show that kind of discrimination, you would have a claim. And then finally, directly relevant to what we're discussing is outright book banning, which is literally, you can't publish or sell this book, full stop. That's the ultimate and pure book ban. And that is clearly unconstitutional. So far, right, we don't know what the Supreme Court, but so far, unless the material is considered obscene, which means that it, taken as a whole, lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value, and it appeals to the prurient interest. And that's the idea that it's sort of morbid or sexually arousing or something like that. But the practical consequence is it is very hard, almost impossible, under the Supreme Court's rulings and precedent to get something banned for this reason in 2022. But in late May of this year, a Virginia resident initiated obscenity proceedings against two acclaimed books, one, Genderqueer, a memoir, which was an autobiographical graphic novel that depicts the author's experience as a non-binary asexual person, and A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas, which is a fantasy novel. And these obscenity proceedings come amid a nationwide rise in efforts to restrict people's access to books and our ability to learn, read, and think for ourselves. This case should be dismissed, and probably will be, but the fact that the Virginia law allows any resident to initiate obscenity proceedings is really scary, because it can gum things up for a period of time. It can affect the public's interest or appetite for the book in different ways, and that should concern us as well. I want to just close with a quick comment on what happened in the past and my concern that we could be coming in a circle to have this sort of thing happen again. So in the 1920s, the now classic novel Ulysses was run in serial form by a publication called the Little Review, and the courts decided that the book was obscene, and it wasn't until 1933 that this was overturned. And it's worth noting that the publishers of this magazine were two lesbians, and there was some concern that it was as much about silencing their voices as editors as it was about the content of Ulysses itself. But the idea is to shut off speech. And so I want to end by talking just for 1 second about what happened in Florida when this law was passed, this Don't Say Gay law, and how Disney finally said something negative about it. And the consequence was that the governor of the state enacted revenge, really retribution against Disney, and took away their special status. And so, in a sense, I see book banning as a way of thinking more broadly about recent government efforts to restrict what the public can hear, especially children, but can hear and consequently think. The Supreme Court has declared that a function of free speech under our system is to invite dispute. It may indeed, I'm quoting from a 1949 case, it may indeed best serve its high purpose when it induces the condition of unrest, creates dissatisfaction with conditions as they are, or even stirs people to anger. And I have concerns that these book bans and these other attempts to kind of restrict what people can read really is pushing us back in that direction. The end.
Thank you, John. Please jot down any questions you have, and we'll address them at the end of each of the presentations. So now it ties right into our librarian. So Tracy Reed has over 30 years of experience in libraries around the country. She started her career in 1991 at the Abington Township Public Library as a shelver and library assistant. She then moved to Seattle and worked for King County Library System in administration, first for the regional libraries and then in information technology. 1 year after not seeing the sun for 96 days, she moved to Florida and worked for the Clearwater Public Library System for over 15 years in a variety of positions. After building and opening the new Countryside Branch Library, she moved back to the greater Philadelphia area. After a brief stint as the manager of the Levittown Library, she became the director of the Warminster Township Free Library in Bucks County. She started as Montgomery County District Consultant Librarian in June 2021. She is passionate about equality of access to resources and the importance of public libraries in creating and sustaining vibrant and engaging communities. She's a member of the Pennsylvania Library Association, the American Library Association, and the Public Library Association. She lives in Doylestown with her wife and 2 dogs. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you, Dana. So I'm going to take what John said and kind of scope it into the public library setting, talk a little bit about how public libraries operate when it comes to challenges and bans, what our policies are, what we follow, what the most banned books are, and that type of things. So when we talk about banned books in the public libraries, we're actually talking about materials challenges. And there's a difference, as John said, between a ban, what actually is a ban, where you cannot have the material at all, and a challenge. And what the American Library Association does and tracks, and when you hear the 10 most banned books and those types of things are generally challenges. And what a challenge constitutes in public library world is a formal challenge that, and I'll talk a little bit about this process in a minute, a formal challenge to a material that is on the shelf of a public library. This formal challenge generally comes in the form of a form that's filled out and goes through a process, which, like I said, I'll talk a little bit about, through where it is decided whether to keep the book, to remove the book, or to change where the book is located. As John said, public libraries have the ability to do that and decide if something is appropriate where it is, or it needs to be moved otherwise. The mission of public libraries is equal and open access. It is the place that should be both a mirror and a window. So it is a mirror of your community, and it is a window to other communities and other peoples and other anythings around the world. People walk into a public library and can have the potential to experience worlds beyond their imagination. That is what we offer. That is what we bring to communities. So when we're looking at what gets challenged and what gets removed, fortunately, most challenges do not ultimately result in a removal, but they do. We're talking about limiting in scope what a community has access to through those mirrors and those windows. Public libraries do not act. We are different in scope from school libraries in that we do not act in loco parentis. We are not responsible for the behavior of people, behavior of children, monitoring children, that type of thing. And most public libraries' behavior policies reflect that. But in that, we also give the right and the responsibility to the parent or guardian to monitor what their children read. So the public library is open to all ages. Most places in public libraries are open to anyone who walks in our doors. So when we're looking at the things that children and people can access, most libraries do not restrict where children and where people can go, what they can pull off the shelf. So if we move something based on, or we place something in a teen section, or in a tween section, or in the picture book section, we base that on our material selection policies, and all libraries have a material selection policy, which governs how we buy our books, where we place our books, what to do when something is challenged. I guess I'll get to that in a second. And it's broad, and it goes everything from reviews and demand and what has been purchased prior. And I'm not going to go into the specifics because everybody's a little bit different, but it's based on a number of different factors. And those factors go into how we spend our very limited resources for items that both reflect and broaden our community's scope. So when a challenge comes in, most challenges start with a patron coming in. 45% of challenges do come from patrons, 18% come from parents, and the other percentages come from different places and different people. When a challenge comes in, most of the time it starts with, you know what? Either I saw the cover on the shelf and I don't like it, or I don't want my child to have it, or my kid brought this home and I don't like it. So generally speaking, what the library does is have a conversation. So what did you like about it? And I'm sorry to hear that you feel this way. And engage and talk. Many times people just want to hear themselves heard. If it goes further, if there is an actual challenge, the formal challenge, every library has a form that then the staff member or the director, whomever's in charge at that point, can hand to the patron and have them fill out. At that point, procedures vary from library to library, but generally speaking, there is a committee convened made up of staff members and the board and that type of thing, that then reviews the item, reviews why it was purchased, reviews the checkouts, reviews a whole plethora of different things, and then makes the decision as to whether or not it should be kept, it should be moved, or should be removed from the collection. This process can take a while, and then generally speaking, the person who brought the challenge is notified of the decision. This process can take a while. Sometimes in policies and procedures for the public libraries, they have a time frame that they must have it done by. Sometimes they don't. What we're seeing right now in public libraries is the same thing that John talked about, and the same thing that school libraries and school boards are seeing, is a concerted effort by groups, national groups that organize on social media, to come in and target certain titles and target certain books and or authors that they may not have read the book, but they've been told by members of their group that on page 85, paragraph 3, there is something that they might be offended by, or they should be offended by. And that begins this process. So that's what public libraries are seeing. That's how public libraries are now in this. And challenges have been going on for decades. The American Library Association has had the freedom to read and the internet and the freedom to read, freedom of information, which is different than the Freedom of Information Act. Don't get me wrong on that one. But those values are intrinsic and have been readopted several times by the American Library Association and are in most libraries' materials selection and materials development policies and procedures. So that is how public libraries deal with it. The number one reasons for challenging books in libraries are LGBTQIA+, political viewpoints. Violence has dropped. It used to be violence was of the top 3 reasons. It's now within the top 10, under 5. Racist content. Witchcraft was up there for a while when Harry Potter was one of the most challenged books. And those are the types of things that people walk into libraries and don't want on our shelves. Again, we are windows and mirrors. We give everyone access to things that will reflect their community and expand their knowledge of the world around them. There is American Library Association is the national organization for public libraries and school libraries and special libraries and all of that. They and the Public Library Association to both track and have resources for libraries who are experiencing challenges and from their communities and that type of thing. So they are available to that, excuse me. But we have not seen the level that school libraries have gotten. I think that will be coming. I think that this wave is coming for public libraries. All signs point to it, but we are not to the point with where school libraries are at this moment. And that's my portion of this. I'm going to pass it back to Dana.
Right. And that takes us down. So we're looking at it through a wider perspective, and now we're going to pull it to a smaller lens, a more focused lens. And we're going to hear from Jessica Guzman. She's the author of Adelante. It's selected by Patricia Smith as the winner of the 2019 Gatewood Prize. Her work has appeared in such publications as Shenandoah, 32 Poems, and the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day. And her honors include American Literary Review's Poetry Award, Harper Pallet's Milton Kessler Memorial Prize for Poetry, and the Product Poetry Prize. She serves on the masthead of Memorious, a journal of new verse and fiction, and is an assistant professor of English and creative writing at Widener University, where she co-coordinates the creative writing program. Thank you, Jessica, for sharing your perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dana, for that introduction. I'd also like to thank my fellow panelists for all the knowledge that they're sharing with us today. I am here on this panel viewing things from a slightly different lens. I'm here as both a writer and a professor of creative writing, someone who teaches aspiring writers the literary techniques that will help them tell their stories, who guides them as they cultivate a meaningful aesthetic experience to share with others. Storytelling is no easy task. And so I would actually like to begin by sharing with you an excerpt about storytelling from a poet, Mississippi State Poet Laureate Beth Ann Fennelly. This is an excerpt from her poem, Telling the Gospel Truth. The next time a student asks how to become a writer, I will say, sit in a white room without paper and think of the poacher who shot the wing off the bald eagle, who must have seen he wrecked his trophy and, disgusted, did not offer it a second bullet, but thrashed off deeper into the forest, wearing his expensive forest-colored clothes. Then, think of the man from the wild bird sanctuary, who found the eagle, sutured its ragged wing stub, fed the awkward hopping thing for years, and, before it died, harnessed it in a hang glider and took it to the mountain, so one last time its hollow bones could float, so one last time, its eyes could scour the forest floor from Hunter's Height. So one last time, its talons could tear the gauzy cloak of sky, flying in the face of God, that one last time. Think of the poacher, think of the birder. Alternate, shortening the intervals. Don't forget to breathe. When you can hold both of these men in the palm of your mind at the same time, love, come find me and teach me. I wanted to begin with these lines of Fennelly's for what they express about the nature of storytelling. To be a writer, Fennelly tells us, is to hold both poacher and birder in our minds at the same time, to place the poacher's violence and nonchalance toward suffering alongside the birder's care and compassion. She asks the aspiring writer to switch between the two in, quote, shortening intervals. Imagine a film projector alternating between images of poacher and birder, at first slow, then faster and faster. How long before one man becomes interposed onto the other's scene, before our minds can barely separate the two? Of course, Fennelly understands the anxiety this would cause. Don't forget to breathe, she reminds us. And she understands the truth of such overlay. Poacher and birder are both pivotal, not only for the cause and effect of their actions, but for the humanity that connects them to one another, not to mention the eagle, the poignancy of its final flight. To tell a true story, to write with integrity, we must recognize the complex and often contradictory nature of human action. We cannot cherry pick based on preference and arrive at truth. Fennelly's advice is vital for the aspiring storyteller, and I would extend it to readers as well. Books are aesthetic experiences, immersing us into the lives and worlds of other people. To echo my fellow panelist, Tracy Reed, sometimes these are lives with which the reader is familiar, and the book becomes a mirror of one's own experience. Sometimes these are lives completely unlike the readers, and the book becomes a window through which one begins to understand others. Although understanding other people is a critical aspect of education, a common justification of book bans or book banning is the idea of agreeing or disagreeing with the content, as my fellow panelists have been discussing. However, disagreeing with content, of course, does not make it any less prevalent or relevant in our lives. After Carmen Maria Machado's In the Dream House was challenged by parents at a school board meeting in Leander, Texas, she wrote for the New York Times about the education students received through reading books like her own. In the Dream House is a memoir chronicling Machado's experience in an abusive lesbian relationship. One parent concluded that allowing students to read Machado's book would be like child abuse, after reading an excerpt in which Machado refers to a dildo. In response, Machado recognizes her book could be offensive to some, while emphasizing the potential harm students affected by a ban can face, writing, quote, "Preventing children from reading my book or any book won't protect them. On the contrary, it may rob them of ways to understand the worlds they'll encounter, or even the lives they're already living. You can't recognize what you've never been taught to see. You can't put language to something for which you've been given no language." Machado's emphasis on language underscores the role literature takes in helping us perceive the world we live in. Queer people exist, abusive relationships happen, and banning their acknowledgement only minimizes a student's capacity to understand others and themselves. Another common justification, and one that I've heard a lot of other writers in the circles I've been in discuss, is the presence of elements considered uncomfortable, upsetting, or, as John was saying earlier, even obscene, often with focus on these particular scenes or sentences. "Don't forget to breathe," Fennelly says. And in the ensuing pause breathing provides, we may be reminded of the aesthetic and discursive possibilities discomfort enables for readers. As artists crafting stories, writers use discomfort to raise important questions about the experiences their characters undergo. One author said as much just 3 days ago. Last month, a North Carolina school board required that teenage interns exit a public meeting so that one board member could read aloud a passage from John Green's Looking for Alaska, a young adult novel about teenagers at a boarding school. And in this scene, 2 characters engage in oral sex. Significantly, the school board's meeting was in response to a letter signed by 132 parents concerned about news that this and other books were going to be banned from their children's schools. In response, board member Laura Blackwell read aloud the passage and remarked, "My question is, were those scenes even necessary in order to get your message as an author?" Well, Green, a resident of Indiana, was not present at the August school board meeting. However, the author did respond to Blackwell's question this past Friday via Twitter after the Charlotte Observer published an article detailing the situation. In a series of 7 tweets, Green explained the significance of the scene when read in context. He points out the clinical, cold language he used to describe the encounter, a style that is sharply contrasted with the very next scene in the book, where Green uses what he calls a much more flowery style to describe a first kiss between 2 different characters who share a more emotional connection. According to Green, the point is that, quote, "a kiss can be more intimate and meaningful than awkward sexual encounters that aren't with the right person or in the right circumstance." The scenes raise meaningful questions. How did the characters find themselves in their respective situations? How else might these scenes have played out if the characters made different choices, or if the world of the book held different values? What other options does the novel not consider? These questions serve as a reminder that the point is not agreement, but discussion. In other words, the oral sex scene's explicit description creates a productive discomfort, one that inspires conversation and reflection. Reading the scene without the book's larger context becomes a performative act rather than a meaningful one, as it ignores the scene's role as an aesthetic experience to be compared and contrasted with others in the novel. There's more to say about the losses to society when we ban books instead of reading them, when we shut down conversations instead of engaging in them, and not enough time to say it all. Book bans have serious consequences, some that I think about as an educator when I'm encouraging students to be honest about their own experiences, to tell the truth in their writing. That said, I want to end my remarks today by acknowledging the perseverance of those writers and readers who find ways to discuss books and their contents, despite discomfort, disagreement, and censorship. In 2012, the Tucson Unified School District enforced a statewide ban against teaching works that advocate for ethnic solidarity by eliminating their Mexican American Studies program, which has resulted in the de facto banning of over 80 books from the school system. Upon learning his book, Zapata's Disciple, was included on the list, National Book Award winner Martin Espada published a response in the Progressive magazine. He recalled a reading he gave in the mid-90s, where a bomb threat caused audience and author to gather in a nearby parking lot. Despite the threat, he continued to read his poems, and the audience continued to listen. Espada emphasized the resilience of storytelling, stating, quote, "In the end, this book ban is just another bomb threat. All they have done is force us to evacuate the building. We will gather ourselves in the dark and keep reading to each other in whatever light we can find." It is the nature of storytelling to endure, eye to mouth and mouth to ear, passed down through families or shared by friends, or guided through by a teacher or librarian. The writer holds the complex, the contradictory, the truth of their experience in the palm of their minds until they write it down so that it may find us and teach us all the language to understand others and ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. And please just jot down your questions and we'll discuss at the end. And our last presenter, our last panelist is Sharon Ward from the Education Law Center, a senior policy advisor. Sharon is a senior policy advisor and a statewide for Education Law Center, which is a statewide nonprofit legal services and advocacy organization focusing on access to quality education for marginalized and system-involved students, where she manages state and local policy and legislative affairs. She has worked for 30 years inside and outside of government to secure quality schools, affordable healthcare, and people serving budget priorities, and to empower advocates to work for economic and social justice. She served 2 terms on the Albany, New York City Council and directed Governor Tom Wolf's Budget Office and Innovation and Transformation Initiative. She is a founding director of Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center, Pennsylvania's premier progressive policy think tank, and led the fight for an equitable state tax system. She has served as an advisor on state legislation, policy, and advocacy for the School District of Philadelphia, the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit, the Impact Project, Education Voters of Pennsylvania, the Voter Project, and the Keystone Research Center. She lives in Philadelphia with her husband and has 3 grown children. Thank you very much, Sharon.
Great, thanks, Dana. Thanks very much for inviting me to participate in the panel. Thank you for holding the panel this week and really drawing attention to Banned Book Week, which is very important, and to the books that we're seeing banned. And thanks to my fellow panelists. We've covered a lot of ground in 30 minutes. There's been a lot to unpack here and a lot of different vantage points. So I want to do a couple of things. I want to laser focus a little bit on what's happening in schools and school districts, and also talk a little bit about the variety of areas in the political arena that are in which book bans and other free speech restricting activities are taking place, and what's motivating them. A lot of times we think that things happen organically and, they just pop up. And the truth of the matter is that they don't. And I'll talk a little bit about how we got to where we are today. So let me start with a couple of things. The first is sort of the why. We've talked a little bit about the value of having access to books, to learning, the role of schools as assisting students with critical thinking skills, helping students to understand and interpret what they're seeing around them, and to have safe places to discuss these things. And that's very important. But 2 other things. One is schools need to prepare students for the world around them. And most students, when they leave high school and go on to college, many students often feel unprepared. And it's important for schools to make sure that students have a gamut of experiences and have an opportunity to really have a broad education and to learn about things and learn how to talk about things that may be controversial or uncomfortable. The second is schools have to be places where kids can learn. In order to learn, they have to be safe. In order to be safe, they have to be inclusive. And so in addition to the value to the mind, there's the value to the soul. Kids need to be in places where they see and hear from characters that look like them, and where they're able to talk about their own experiences. And that's one of the challenges that we have with these book bans and other policies, that is really seeking to marginalize kids. So I want to go through the landscape in Pennsylvania. I want to start with
the why, where, and how. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing. As John and Tracy have discussed, book bans are a catch-all term for actions to limit access to books, and we're seeing that we're seeing a variety of activities across the state taking place to do just that. Some of them are book removals, formal and informal. Tracy talked about the formal process that exists for removing books from schools, and those formal processes exist. But just to be clear, a lot of what we're seeing is informal processes where someone will email a superintendent or principal or someone at a school district level, and the book will be removed in an informal way. We also have heard about places where parents are going in or kids are going in and just removing books from libraries. So just cut right through, circumvent the process. So just take books out of places where they can be viewed by other students. We're also seeing school district policies promoted by school boards and not by school superintendents for the most part, that take the decisions about what's appropriate in curriculum and books from professional educators and putting them in the hands of parents, community members, the dentist down the street. And that is really the troubling piece. We have folks and it's part of a wider kind of anti-intellectual atmosphere that we have where professionals are not, their judgment is not considered to be valuable. They are not considered to be knowledgeable, and a determination is made that the school boards are political, at the heart of it, political groupings, should be the ones who are making these decisions. So we're seeing a lot of that. And finally, state legislation that will take the changes to curriculum, books, and ancillary materials policies that are happening at the school board level and make them statewide. We're also seeing Pennsylvania has its own Don't Say Gay bill. It is more restrictive than Florida's bill, and these are pieces of legislation that, in addition to limiting the written word, they really limit speech. They prevent kids from asking questions or talking about their families or talking about what they did on Thanksgiving. And the goal there is really to, the common theme is really focus on LGBTQ children and families, and a point of view that looks at sexual orientation, gender identity as ideas and not as people. And so really othering people and not allowing them to express themselves or be viewed in written materials and books and things like that people have access to. It's happening across the state. You will probably have read about it or heard about it in southeastern Pennsylvania. There's a lot happening here. I think the first public acknowledgement of book bans was in the Central York School District, where there was a committee that had recommended a number of books, and the board essentially rescinded that book recommendation, and the kids and teachers and various community members fought that ban successfully. But it's been happening in other places. There are communities across Pennsylvania that do not have a lot of local media, and where there's less controversy within the community, or there are places where people in the community who want to fight book bans and who want to support students and support freedom of speech and support LGBTQ rights are afraid to talk. And that is true in a number of different places around the state. Again, we're seeing this in the state legislature. There are two bills, Senate Bill 1277, which is a legislation that would require school districts to have these book ban policies, and then Senate Bill 1278, which is the Don't Say Gay bill. The Don't Say Gay bill is problematic, and it is terribly problematic, but it really it goes another level, and I think this is something that John talked about, that we're seeing frequently in state legislatures, where in order to enforce these types of laws, they're written so that any individual can file a lawsuit against an individual as a person, a teacher, a counselor. So they also expand individual rights of action so that they have an absolutely chilling effect on teachers, librarians, on counselors, on other folks who, and that's why one of the things we have to think about, even if the bans aren't passed, the policies aren't passed, the laws aren't passed, the professionals in our schools feel intimidated, and parents feel intimidated, and that fear really means that what you have is these de facto bans. You have people not talking about things because they're worried about repercussions, which is terrible. So why is this happening? This did not come out of nowhere. In response to activities that occurred after George Floyd's murder, and the real elevation of understanding the need to change the way we think about race issues in our country, many school districts had started to have equity and inclusion working groups, and had really started to do deep dives about how to make their schools more inclusive. And certainly after the George Floyd's murder and all of the political activity, a lot of school districts advanced this. That was the first place in which a group of people who've been working, frankly, at the university level for a long time about indoctrination of students and about diversity, equity, inclusion groups and colleges and universities, decided to take that framework that they've been using at the college level and bring it to the school district level. And there are a couple of people who have really been championing this, who are part of well-funded right-wing think tanks, and they're very upfront about it. They hit on the term critical race theory because it's a scary term, and it invokes in people's minds something that immediately makes them suspicious of conversations about race. These book bans are, and we saw just a halt in a lot of the activity happening at school district levels. These groups immediately then have kind of moved on to activities that are very much directed at LGBTQ students and transgender students. And while, as I think many speakers have said, the discussion is about sexualized activity, it really is focused on partly on ideas and partly on books that are descriptive of the experience of LGBTQ students. And why are they doing it? To be perfectly honest, there are people who believe that this is a way to win elections and to make substantial changes in schools. It's important to note that they will argue that parents don't have rights, and in the school setting, parents do have a tremendous amount of rights over what students are looking at and reading. So, for example, parents have a right to review curriculum, parents have a right to review books. There are a lot of places in which parents can review and opt their kids out of participation. It's not necessarily something that we would advocate for, but it's there. And so there's a false narrative that parents don't have rights and that schools are foisting these ideas on kids. And that's simply not the case. So what I would ask you to do, and we'll talk more about this, is stay on top of this, follow the legislation. If you're an adult, or regardless of your age, it's really very important for you to weigh in on this with your members of the House and Senate. And call them, send them an email, send them a card. It does not require a lot. If you are someone who is a have graduated from a high school anytime in the last 10 years, pay attention to what's happening at your school district. Go speak to your school board, and don't, if you feel strongly about this, a graduate of an alumna of a school is a very important voice that school boards and parents listen to. So I'll end there, and thanks again for this opportunity.
Thank you so much to each of our panelists. That was a lot of really valuable information. And one reason that we wanted to facilitate this panel discussion today is that there's a lot of information out there, and we don't know what information to listen to or what the truth is. And so we wanted to get experts together who could speak on these issues, because we see a lot of power on the opposition, to what kids are reading, but it's hard to organize on the other side for freedom for kids to access this information. So I appreciate, Sharon, would you suggest, a question we were getting is, what can people do? So what you suggested is write letters to your legislature, right? And go to school board meetings. I see a lot of people in the Center for Ed here, students that were recent graduates. So you're suggesting that they get in touch with their local school boards, and they make their desire for culturally responsive material in their classrooms, those windows and those mirror books that we keep hearing about. So that's what you could do. For those of you who have been asking, how can we organize?
I've got a couple of questions too, actually.
Great.
So the first one is from Emma Riley, and they ask, do you find that books are banned more in libraries in the South rather than in the North? And that's a question to anyone.
I'll speak to it. The information that the American Library Association has, it really has it around the country. There's no one focal point. A lot of the news that we're hearing of is coming out of the Midwest and the southern states, but it's a nationwide effort propagated on social media by one or two organized groups. So I wouldn't say that it's more in one place or another.
A lot of what we're seeing is coming out of Texas and Florida, including policies whole cloth that are just being drafted and then circulated via some of these organizations to sympathetic legislators and school board members. So it is nationwide, but it's also fairly coordinated.
I would say a lot depends also on the leadership in a particular state or community and how it activates people, parents and other community members who have, the right to object. And so it kind of filters down in that way, so that in a community that has one or two activists that may be in touch with national leadership, or it's not surprising a state like Florida or Texas where the governors are so vocal in their views that, that local activists, pick up on that. So I think a lot of it has to do with both explaining why it happens more in places like Texas and Florida, but also why it's also happening all over the country, because with laws and with the zeitgeist being very, in favor of parents having all this control over the, professional judgment of librarians and other educators. That's sort of where we are.
Okay. Thank you for those responses. The next question that I have is from Sage Milo, and they ask, do public libraries give different or less serious consideration to challenges that come from people who are not from the local community and or from people who have not read the book?
All non-formal, informal challenges are taken, all challenges are taken seriously. Let me start there. Every person who walks into the library has the right to be heard and the right to be listened to. That said, many libraries' formal policy challenge, formal challenge form has a place, whether you are a member of the community, do you have a library card, did you read the whole book, those types of things. I can't speak for individual libraries. However, I will say that all of the information that is on that form weighs into the consideration, but the consideration is on the material specifically. Very little focus in my past experience, having been on challenge committees, with the individual who's done it, once it's a formal challenge, does not weigh on our decision. But I do not speak for all libraries.
I have a question too, to go on that. So it seems like you're getting a lot of, like resistance to books, but do you get the opposite? Do you have people writing in books that they want to see in the library in support of books? Do you have that letter writing campaign to counter? Is that something that's important?
Yeah, anytime you see something in the media that says, this book has been challenged, and I'll use the Texas and Florida. There have been several school districts that have pulled, and I'll use York County since Sharon referred to York County. York County schools, they're very restrictive, pulled books out of classrooms and out of libraries. The public library director of York County wrote an amazing op-ed in their local media saying how libraries can support how public libraries can support the school districts that have these. And a lot of it is, we make sure that we have the items that have been challenged or pulled. We make sure that the public is aware that we have these items. A lot of times libraries will get donations of those items once they've been publicly challenged or banned in schools. And we, again, relying on the collection development policies of the individual libraries, look at what can be on our, and finite fiscal resources, look at what should be on the shelves of the public libraries. But yes, the letter writing, the support, even for a program, a challenged program, or, the getting on and saying, we really support what you do. We love our library. Telling your local elected officials, your township supervisors, your municipal, representatives, that you value your library is the best thing that you can do for us, and to support libraries and to support, the freedom to be a mirror and a window.
Thank you.
I do have one last question. This one's from Caitlin Irby, and her question is, do you think that it's problematic to use banned interchangeably for actual banned books as well as challenged books? Does this result in the word banned losing its true meaning, or does it make the concept of challenging or banning books more easily understood?
Great question.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that I think a couple of us spoke to. I'll just say briefly that there are different ways in which you can ban a book. A challenge is not a ban, right? But it can lead to a ban in terms of, effect, right? So you can ban a book completely, as in the Ulysses case, where it just couldn't be published. That's extreme, and that's very rare, and that's not likely to happen. So what we're really talking about is banning them from places where people that maybe most want to read them and have the most reason to be interested are not able to read them. So effectively, those are bans as to those people. And a challenge is just the first step towards a ban. That's how I would characterize it, but an important step.
I don't want to get into library speak. We have a whole, like every industry, we have a whole language that revolves around this. But John's right. A challenge is the first step. You can't have a ban without a challenge. So when we talk about book banning, it's snappy. People hear it. And that works both ways. That cuts both directions. Yes, it can get people active and activated against challenges and against bans. But by the same token, it gets them activated toward challenging and banning. They're not interchangeable. I don't use them interchangeably, but I live in library land. So, it's my language.
And I would just say, I look at intent. The intent is to remove the book and take it away so that no one can ever read it again in a public setting, who's not an adult or perhaps not anywhere. So that is a ban. Even while there are steps to it at the end of the day, the intent is to prevent individuals from reading the book.
So panelists, we're up. Christina?
Oh, are we completely out of time?
It's 1 o'clock.
All right. Okay. I'm sorry about that. Yes, to respect everyone's time.
Thank you all. And Christina, you're going to put in we have 2 more events this week to continue this discussion. Alex Gino, the author of a very banned book, will be here Wednesday, and folks from the Education Law Center will be here on Friday as well for advocacy training. So we're more prepared to know what to do in these unusual times. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, Christina, my co-conspirator in all of these efforts. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone, for attending, all 60 of you. Please go out and talk about this with your colleagues and your friends and your family members so we could weigh in on the other side and have our voices heard as well. So thank you.